the reason we put together this piece, we don't often do this piece because it's actually not about the technology, the session I'm going to do. And the reason we do this is because we got feedback from customers about the sales process itself, because we find a lot of our customers have been charged with implementing a sales process, and they're trying to understand it themselves. And then they have to deal with the complexity of the software and then figure out how to put it all together. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I've also seen one thing that in my life, I've worked with CRM software or something related for quite some time, maybe 20 years or so. And the biggest bottleneck I've seen is, the biggest issue I've seen is people usually inherit something, it's already there, and the process is put in place. Or if somebody is putting it in place the first time, they instrument something, and then it just sticks forever as generations of people start to use it. And the biggest bottleneck I've seen is people don't have a very good handle of their sales process before they model it into the software. Right? And so that's why it falls apart, because the clarity of what they're doing isn't actually reflected, isn't actually there, therefore it's not reflected in the software. So that's what I'm trying to do over here. And so let's go. So we'll cover three things. Elements of a sales process. I'll walk through some examples of it. And then if you codify for your own business what we're talking here, that will help you get more out of those sessions. So I like to go back. This is one of the few people I actually have ever respected in the management guru space. Drucker says that this is so fundamentally simple, right? There's no jargon here. There's nothing. Everybody just gets it. And I think a sales process is really focused on getting that first part done. Yeah, so the other part is, of course, the role of what I talked about earlier, customer success, retention, loyalty, all of that has come into place. But fundamentally, you can't retain a customer until you get them, right? So this is the fundamental aspect of a sales process. Again, you'll see all these words. As soon as you go into the technology screens, you'll see all this jargon and words thrown at you. Leads, accounts, contacts, all that stuff. So I'm trying to put some perspective into this, and so put it down to some basics so we can all follow. So lead is something that could potentially turn into a customer. If you're good, it will. If your process is off, it won't. So it's as simple as that. And how this happens essentially can be grouped into three broad areas. So you have something called generating a lead, because you got to find a person first who could potentially become your customer. And then you got to find out if that works. Is that person appropriate for your business? Are you appropriate for their problem? That's the qualifying process, right? And then fundamentally, once you've done that, you're going to engage towards acquiring that customer. So you go through a process. There's all kinds of things involved in that. That is the actual selling process. So if you look at how this breaks down in organizations, it's roughly like this. It's the focus of the left two are usually the focus of a marketing group, and the one on the right is the focus of a sales group. But as we discussed in that earlier session, software evolved on its own, right? So sales software evolved first before a lot of the marketing software came into place. So they started usurping some of the functions of the marketing stuff. So you'll find things like campaigns and leads and stuff in sales software. So what you're seeing is actually a vestige of history. And ideally, you would have these really classified into marketing and sales. And the reason I separate these two is because the technology is different, the people are different. In most organizations, the kind of skills you need for a marketing job are entirely different from a sales job. You all know that, right? And I'll tell you, speaking from a perspective of software, it's fundamentally different. You can hire a person out of college and you can make them a marketer in a year or two. You can't make them a salesperson, because there's that certain level of experience required, there's a certain level of empathy, emotional maturity, things that you need to be a successful salesperson. So what a lot of companies do is they combine this thing together. And salespeople are typically expensive resources. Marketing is cheaper. So that's one good reason to think of it separately. Another thing is marketing can be easily outsourced. Sales, almost never. So that's part of it too. You can if all you're doing is a distributorship. But fundamentally, most businesses do their sales. They want that relationship with the customer. So it's good to think of these as separately, because a lot of time we mix expensive resources and make them do stuff that can be done with less expensive resources. So it's a good differentiation to keep in your mind. Okay. So how does your business generate leads? Is it online or is it offline? Another way to think about it is who does it? And this goes back to that point I brought up about marketing and sales. Who does it in your organization? It's an important question because it fundamentally determines how much money you spend on this and the resources you put on this. Next thing is, we touched on this too, is it considered sales or marketing role? Has lead generation evolved over time? You see a lot more, the online has something to do with it, right? Some things have been inviolate, like customer referrals, events, trade shows. We use both. So here's some ideas on how to generate leads. I'll read them out of the type form. Is website, email. No one actually mentioned email, although I'm sure many of you do. But email is a big form of lead generation. Trade shows we talked about. How about good old cold calling? Pick up the phone and call, right? That's an example of something you wouldn't put an experienced person on. And lists. Somebody asked me earlier about how we use lists. I don't have too much faith in that, but largely because there's so many people vending this stuff that most of what you get is junk. But I do advocate building your own lists. And social media, walk-ins. If you have a physical organization, people actually come in, right? So some ideas of leads. So let's talk about the next thing. So once you get the lead, and remember the next process, you qualify them, or as marketers like to say, you nurture them. There's something parental about this whole thing. So when you have a prospect, you have to nurture them. So how do you nurture these leads? Okay, so you take the region and then you bring in the right person. Okay, that's one way to assign it. It's a common way to do it. Sometimes people do it. Larger companies look at people with special expertise. Something comes in from healthcare, they put a person from healthcare, or somebody who knows that. So here's another question to ask. What information are you tracking? So you've now got a lead, and you're connecting with the lead, and you're going through a qualifying process. So what information do you track? You touched on some of that. So what are you trying to learn about the customer? You have to understand that. So then in your nurturing process, you actually collect some of that information. How do you schedule it? How do you do follow-ups? What happens when a lead comes in? Today we have all this automated software. How are we using it? When a lead comes in through an email campaign, what do? What's your policy? For instance, we have a policy that when a lead comes in, within 24 hours, someone has to send out a response. And when the volume gets high, the response is, I will get back to you. So man, that's not what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, it's a kind of policy, and we have that. As soon as something comes in, it makes a huge difference. We've actually run some experiments to see, in fact, for us, we even set less than 24 hours. We once ran an experiment to see what the difference is if we try to do it in the first hour, okay? Just for kicks. And somebody ran, this guy Peter, who runs our sales, ran this whole experiment, and he put up all these stats. And he showed, he did this over 2 different periods of time. And he actually showed that the 1 hour did significantly better in terms of people connecting back with us. So there's something, I guess it means that in some businesses, when people are reaching out to you, they have an immediate problem. So and it shows, apart from showing your responsiveness, they also have a problem that needs to be solved. And oftentimes, it is urgent. So here's a big one. You could spend a lot of time on this. So if you don't articulate this for your business, you're never going to find that out. You're going to chase things. Yesterday, we had a session with partners, and with Zoho partners. And one of the questions I heard was, we get customers from their perspective. They're looking for leads, right? And they want to engage with them. They want stuff. They want consulting. And it goes on and on. Sometimes they want a field visit, a site trip, come to my office. And how do you know when to stop? How do you know that this person is getting somewhere, or it's something valuable to you, or they're willing to pay? Those are the kinds of things. How do you know you have a real selling opportunity? So this is part of the qualification process. So I put down some ideas on how you might actually generalize this for a business. So you assign the lead to somebody, so that's the first thing. When you get leads, you assign it, so someone's responsible for it, and there's a name against every lead that comes in, and hopefully that's done automatically. That should be part of what your CRM software does. It should assign it automatically. There's a follow-up. You mandate a follow-up. So in CRM parlance, that means you set up a task, which says that in 24 hours, this person will get a reminder saying, you got this lead. Have you done this yet? Right? And once that process starts, so that takes care of the first thing that you want to automate. You don't want that to be the volition of your sales rep. At the volition of your sales rep. You want that to happen automatically. It gets assigned and they follow up. And then you start your process of gauging interest. You gauge intent. I talked about this example. You want to understand the intent. Is there a purchase intent here? Specifically. You look for opportunities. Someone else pointed out that I like to do site visits because when I go there, I find out other problems they have. It's happened to me a lot of times. They get on the phone and somebody's asking something and you back them off a little bit and I'm not necessarily trying to sell them something, but I find out there's a bigger problem or there's some other allied problem. And maybe I'm qualified to solve that. And I endear myself more to that customer because of that. So that's the qualification process itself. So now we're in the selling process. We've qualified something, we've determined that there's some sort of an opportunity, and we're ready to sell. So sometimes in organizations, some organizations, this is passed to a different part of the organization. So a sales team would pick it up. And there's a notion of a conversion. So if you see the word converted, that really means it's moved from a sales marketing process to a sales process. That's what it means. Even if it's done by the same person, that's what it signifies. So it marks a transition into a formal sales process. And now you have somebody who's really a sales prospect. So keep in mind, this process sounds simple, but getting this right will have a huge impact on the resources your organization spends. If you do poor qualification over time, you'll basically have people chasing poor leads. And you never get this right the first time. You never get this right the first time. You do it, you sit down, you figure out what we should change. Was customer size even relevant? For example, you might come up with that. Maybe geography was relevant. Maybe something else is relevant. So you bring that back into your criteria and you keep refining it. So let's put some formalism around it. What exactly is it? We've now the sales process, and now as soon as you go into the CRM, you'll see all that jargon all over again. So I'm going to simplify it for you a bit. So it's basically a sequence of progressive stages. A sequence means it happens one after the other, typically. And progressive means one is ahead of the other. So when you've gone from stage 1 to stage 2, something has happened. Some progress has been made, or at least you think some progress has been made. It may or may not end in a sale, but to all intents, it appears that you've gone further with that customer. So that is essentially a sales process, a sequence of progressive stages. So when you start using your CRM, that's the first thing you need to model in it. And this is one thing I've seen with a lot of people who use CRMs. They don't do this right. They pick up whatever the default model in the CRM is and just use it. This is specific to your business. So at any point in time, multiple prospects, sales prospects, may be at different stages. So you may have 35 people you're dealing with. And let's say you have a 4-step process. You may have 16 of them in the first stage and a few more in the second and so on. And 2 or 3 that you're dealing with in the final stage of your sales process. So this collectively, this notion, again, to familiarize you with the terms, the prospects and their stages is what people call a sales pipeline for a business, right? So it's your pipeline. Think of it as a pipeline of deals, what's coming through it. And over time, I used to run a sales team at least a couple of times before. And a lot of this is heuristics. There's no logic or model to all this. You just figure it out by experience. You figure out things like if I have a 4-stage pipeline, I would have a guideline which said I need about 20 things in stage 1 before on average I get 1 thing in stage 4. Right? So that's the pipeline. That thing never comes from the software. And that's the problem. People use the software and think your sales is going to improve. The software is just a way for you to model it and use that information better to make these decisions and deduce these inferences. Okay, so you understand and see, we've done this over 9 months or a year and a half, and we're figuring out that if I have about 15 or 20 over here, I'm going to wind up with something in this quarter. So if you have somebody working for you or you're the sales rep yourself, then you have a sense for what this thing looks like. So people use the terms. Are your salespeople padding their numbers? Well, this is a good way to find out. How many leads do you have, right? And then did they go through the qualification criteria we had? Because if you run a sales team, you'll constantly find that salespeople are very optimistic, and they need to be optimistic, right? And they will always have a lot of leads. You'll always have a fantastic pipeline, and they'll run through the software, and they'll run all the probabilities, and you'll see this revenue that's going to come up for the quarter looking really good, and it doesn't happen, right? So the purpose of the software is to test your intuition and to improve it. It's not simply to execute a set of automated steps. Okay, so how should you actually define your sales process? So stages, we talked about that. So are they actually progressive? And this is not an obvious question, because I've seen this in software sales. Sometimes they start at stage 7 in a 10-step process. Sometimes they start at 1. It's hard to predict where it starts. Sometimes you think, I've just done a demo and I've talked to the buyer, and it doesn't happen. And you think you're on stage 8. So sales automation software tends to attribute percentages and probabilities to this. Take that with a pinch of salt. I know some of my colleagues will advocate this over the next couple of days. But take it with a pinch of salt. because it's only as good as your own intuition. So use that, mark it up, change it, see if it really is predictive. So how do you know you have the right process? You've done all this, you figured out your process, you've put it together. How do you know? There's no real easy way. You only know by the results you see. So you put this thing out, you have it for a year, you have it for a couple of years, and you see what's working. What did I had a 6-step process. Was step 4 really needed? Did that help me? How can I look? Let's look at the deals that we did. How many of them went through 4 and that seemed to turn it? That's the kind of way you use the software. It's really, like I said, and I'll keep repeating this, it's not some piece of automation that's going to magically bring revenue. It's simply a way for you to deal with a mass of information in a smart way, derive inferences, and model it again quickly in a better way. So if you look at stages and you open, actually I had someone go through the top 4 or 5 CRMs and pull out everything that they have and look at what they have as stages. I'm sure some of these sins are ours as well. So you have all these stages. This is what you'll see. If you pick up a CRM software, you have all these stages. Now, how are you supposed to figure out which of these apply to you, right? The best thing to do is cut through all of that. Just figure out what works for your system. So here's one that I put together last week to try and represent a generic sales process. So I said, okay, let me try it by you. So I said, you present the value. Remember, the person is now a qualified prospect. Otherwise, you shouldn't even be here. Let me say that. You shouldn't get into a sales process unless you qualified somebody. That's the role of marketing. If you're here already and you're talking to a customer the first time, you're not going to get good ratios simply because you haven't done your homework. So you're here and you're presenting the value of what you do. Well, oftentimes there are issues with it. There are objections, there are issues, there's other things they have. You got to deal with that, right? Because you didn't anticipate that. You did not know that, in fact, when you presented the value. That's what happens. So you put that together, you go back, and now you're trying to see if they actually, you're trying to get a gauge of the commitment of the person you're dealing with. So there are various ways to find commitment. In software, they use the classic thing, do you have a budget? I hate that. That's a very uninventive question to ask if you have a budget. So you try and gauge people's intent by seeing what they do, what they know, how important it is to their own success, stuff like that, right? And those are things that are better predictors of their intent than whether they have a budget. The other thing is decision makers. So a lot of times you're dealing with somebody who may be a front or who may be the person who just picked up the phone. You don't know if that the decision is going to be made there. So you got to find out who are the people who are making a decision. Sometimes it's decision makers. Sometimes it's people who need to be in the process. If you deal with large companies, there's always that pugnacious procurement guy. And if you haven't got the procurement guy in, if you're dealing with a big company, you're nowhere close to the end of the sale. Because he or she has to give their blessing. So that's an example of somebody you need to identify. Sometimes you identify a blocker. So you're selling a piece of software, and there's an IT manager there who doesn't want your software because it makes their job. Maybe they don't have a role after that, right? So you got to identify the blocker and see who that is and work that into your sales process. So that's, again, this is why experience fits into this process. It's not about technology. It's about common sense in your technology. You propose a solution, you negotiate some terms, and then you close out the sale. So I'm going to sum it all up for you. So this is the sales process, the generation part, the qualifying part. Thing to take away is you build it on your own, see what works for you, and separate the skills. If you have the ability to separate the skills, put the most valuable people to the right. So some considerations in designing a sales process. I put this together based on my own experience. I'm going to start at the top left and move around. Is your process clear? Do people get it? Do they know the roles involved? Do they know the steps, the stages, the process? Is it clear? Can you explain it? That's the first test, if you actually have a process. The second thing I'll talk about is it repeatable? So did you do it because of that one specific deal? Or is this something that actually makes sense? Did it work over time? Did you do this last year and you're still doing it this year? Usually, you've inherited something that head of sales put together, and it worked on some deal they did. They did an RFP. They'll have RFP over there. RFP is request for proposal, right? Because that guy worked with some big government deals. That maybe is not even part of your sales process, right? Because he put it in there. This is how sales happens in a lot of companies. A sales guy comes in, he actually was using a CRM somewhere else, he or she, and puts it together in the new place and creates the same process. And everybody's supposed to follow that, right? So you have to question that, see if that works. Repeatable. Third one is predictable. So it's not specific to an owner. So you look at this, it works for everybody. It's not a particular person who's doing it. If a different type of person is using this, it should work for them too. That's something that's predictable. Can I look at the system and actually say that I can gauge that maybe I'll have 10 deals by the end of this quarter? Can I have that level of predictability roughly? Maybe 8 to 10 deals, something like that. Can that determination be made by independent people? And that's the last part. So can you forecast revenue the same way? Does it work the same way for everybody, or is it an artifact of a person's thinking? So these are the tests. They're more qualitative rather than measurable, as you can see. But this is what I was sitting down and thinking of all the things I've done. How would I generalize that? And say, if I were to hand this over, I would say, give me your deal. Let me run your deal on it and see if it works. Or pick a different person who didn't come from this organization and see if it works for them. So that's the way I would test this out. So this is why you actually would need a CRM. You've got your process down, you understand it, you want to achieve these kinds of goals, and now you're talking to the software. And now you're investigating the software. So this is the kind of homework you have to do. A lot of times, this is not done. And then you're winding up trying to work with the software, so your focus is now on badgering the software rather than getting your sales process down. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and here's something. I use the same format for car sales. So if you look on the left, that's what people do now, website, dealer walk-in, so on. Look at their qualification process. Sometimes it's just the fact that they showed up on your door is a qualification process. And that works for auto companies because the person just walked in. That's a qualification right there. Maybe they know about the car they're trying to buy. That's another qualification. So they're closer to making a decision, perhaps. They're ready with credit, right? So this thing works. Look at the sales process there. Similar to what we talked about earlier. You propose that you understand, people want specific things in their car. You put together a package, you quote a price, you go to the negotiation. Finance, when you buy a car, you realize how much, what the credit and financing, how much of a signal it is to people in the sales process, because most people finance their cars. So that's a simple process. Here's a process for software. So you see similar types of things on the left for generating calls. Let's focus on the right. A lot of times in software, you have to demo the product because people don't get it. And you have to do that. Sometimes we demo products too early. I've been in sales processes where I pull people back from demoing the product. And a lot of people tend to do it because they say the product speaks for itself. Our own guys do it. And sometimes it's a good thing. A lot of times it prevents you from understanding their need. It prevents you from doing the things I talked about earlier. Understanding the need, looking for a fit, using the qualification. Because when you're demoing, you're not listening. You're talking, right? But it's an essential stage. A lot of people want to see that. Similar things, offering a trial. We had a comment here about free software. That actually is true in the software business because a lot of people do that. There's a notion of you can try the product at no risk, no cost, propose a solution, close. You even have free products. So you can see this of what you would need to do. If you haven't constructed your own sales process, look at this and actually go through this exercise. Know what your lead sources are. If you want to go and explore something else, mark that out for exploration. Know what your qualification criteria are. What are you looking for? Let's say you got 100 leads. What would you look for? Outline your sales process and stages. We talked about that. Just see what works. Start from something like the picture I had. Cut it down if it doesn't make sense. See what you want to automate. As soon as you get a lead, you want an email sent to the right person. As soon as somebody reached out to you, you want to send a confirmation mail. That's where a CRM helps to put the glue and automate the mundane. So look for the things that you actually want to automate and standardize and build that into the system. So that will be things like tasks, like workflows, stuff like that. Look for things you want to automate so it doesn't become the individual whim of the individual salesperson. It becomes a standard in the organization. Flowchart your entire process. Draw it on a piece of paper. If you can't draw it on a paper, you don't know it. At least that's the way it works for me. If I can't write anything down, I really don't know it. And so put that in a piece of paper and then approach your CRM. Okay? Thank you.